All right, thanks everybody. As announced, my name is Oscar, and I'm with SOTI. I've been with the organization for 10 years, and what we do is mobile device management in terms of what the common phrase is. But there's a little bit more to it. I had the opportunity to present, and I kind of chose this topic just because I've been in the industry for a number of years and something I know quite well. So I'm just going to give kind of an overview as to where the space is and talk about some of the kind of notable features and importance of mobile device management. If you're dealing with IT, this is bread and butter for IT nowadays, right? It's all the buzz in terms of how do we manage these mobile devices. But the need's been there for many years, and SOTI is one of the companies that's been there for many years. So I've used the deck as a starting point. That's the SOTI deck that we use. I don't mean for this to be a sales pitch. I'm just kind of just using some of the background material that we tend to use when we're explaining our product. And without further ado, let's get started. So just again a little bit about SOTI. We're a Canadian company. We're based in Mississauga. We have development here in Waterloo as well. We just opened an office this year near Columbia and Phillip, just a small office, but we're primarily out of Mississauga. We've been developing this solution for many years. We've got customers around the globe in all sorts of different verticals, and we're widely recognized by the fancy business analysts out there. Just to give you an idea of customers, I don't mean to flaunt who our customers are, but customers are in all sorts of different market verticals, right? So it's not like a horizontal, it's not a vertical-based solution. It's a horizontal solution that's applicable pretty much to any industry. And there's lots of companies in it. So why is mobile device management needed? Sure, a little annoying bubble there. All right, so not a big fancy definition, but I kind of define it really simply as to equip the IT admin with the tools needed to support the deployment of mobile devices in the enterprise. There's really three parts to mobility. Number one, it's the devices themselves. Number two, it's the apps that are being used on these devices. And number three, it's the user that has to interact with the hardware and that application, right? Dealing with those three things without some sort of tool set to manage that process is crazy. And very commonly what we see nowadays, like it's mobile device management has become quite mainstream and there's lots of kind of know-how. But historically, it was very common that you'd see an enterprise get all excited, yeah, we're going to go mobile, right? And they buy a couple thousand devices and this is awesome, right? And then they pay a developer to develop an app, or maybe they're taking something off the shelf. They say, great, send these devices out to the field. And then the user starts calling. And the guy, I got problems. And the IT's guy like, how am I going to help you, right? If I don't have any tools to reach out to your device, if I don't know exactly what's loaded on the device, what settings you have on that thing, how am I going to manage it? It's kind of the same idea as what we already had with computers, like PCs and laptops, but it's just the environment in which that mobile device is used is a lot more varied than you're sitting at your desk or you're at home with your laptop, right? So that's why there was some unique challenges. When we talk about the sort of the life cycle, we're enrolling devices, we have to deal with security of those devices. We're thinking about how to provision those devices in terms of settings or applications, so that gets into managing the applications, as well as managing the content. By content, we're talking about pretty much file distribution is the most common thing. You want to push out certain data to the devices, and then completing the life cycle, you have retirement. So we have all these other things around the outside here, where we are, again, just dealing with the reality of the enterprise has certain business requirements, security requirements. They want to get ROI out of this investment, right? So all these different things have to be taken into consideration. You want to, why are you doing mobility? Well, you want to reduce workload, increase performance. You want to make sure that, you have good adoption. Very, very often, there was deployments where user adoption was terrible, right? And everybody's scratching their heads, but just gave them this fancy device. Why don't they want to use it? You got to really understand the user and their scenario. The IT guy wants a single pane of glass. He's got devices all over the world. How am I going to successfully manage this? I want to have a simplified and powerful view into all these devices. So, the rise of mobile devices. So, for a lot of businesses, the idea of mobile device management actually got rooted in what is called purpose-built or ruggedized devices. These are the sorts of devices that you've all seen with, say, a courier is a good example, right? The guy shows up to your door with a parcel. It's got a built-in laser scanner, right? And the thing looks like a brick. Well, it's designed to be a brick, right? It's designed to take a fall to the ground, and it's not going to, mind. It can go into a freezer, or it can go into an oven, kind of thing. The thing's going to last, right? Those devices typically have been powered with the Windows CE or Windows Mobile Operating System. So Microsoft came out with that OS way back in 2000, launching Pocket PC, and they thought they were going to revolutionize the world. Everybody's going to carry a PDA, right? Turns out the OS was a complete flop for the consumer space, but it wasn't for this particular market segment. And manufacturers of these devices said, hey, this OS is pretty damn cool, and we're going to adopt it. So you had manufacturers of all sorts all adopting this one OS, and it drove this space. SOTI really got started in this space. So that's where our legacy is, and which is a little bit different than the corporate liable sort of device. This one here, you probably think of first something like a BlackBerry, right? So it's driven, I'm going to say, a little bit more kind of white collar of an application, but it's the same idea. The company has decided that there's some sort of value add by giving our employees mobile devices. So we're going to purchase the device and we're going to issue them out to our employees. You want to enforce policies, right? Again, data is now on this device, right? So whether that's email or some other application, there is data there, and you need to make sure that you're managing it in a smart way to not compromise the corporation. It's not consumer driven, so the end user of the device didn't get a choice. It's like, here is your device, and you just kind of shut up and smile if you don't like it. It's the one that the company is telling you to use. And a lot of the use here started off as email, right? That was the primary business driver. More recently, there was the big advent of BYOD, to bring your own device. So this really has to do with the whole transition, I'd say, from the BlackBerry era to the iPhone and Android, and everybody wants to kind of bring their own snazzy phone to work and connect to company email. There's two other acronyms here. CYOD is choose your own device, right? So that was an interesting variation of bring your own device, because what happened is the IT admin realized, this is insane. There's thousands of devices out there. How the heck am I going to possibly be able to manage all these variances, right? So they said, okay, let's take back some control and say, here's a catalog. Go to the store and buy one of these 5 devices, and I will, be able to manage it. But don't show up with a Palm OS, because that thing is just completely not manageable. The last one, COPE, corporately owned, personally enabled. So that is actually very popular in terms of adoption today. There's a lot of buzz about BYOD, but COPE still tends to be the most common variant, which is, again, the company has employed me, they've given me this phone, so it's still property of the company, but they said, go install your Facebook and whatever personal apps that you want to have on the device. You can have your personal stuff on there. We're just going to manage the business aspect of this phone, right? Again, it's kind of similar to corporate liable. We have to enforce policies on these devices. But what's interesting about this one here is the separation between the workspace and the personal space that are both on the device. And there's a couple different variants. We'll get into how that's done depending on the operating system in question. The last thing is the Internet of Things. So when we talk about mobile device management, It's extending beyond just what we call today a phone or a tablet or a laptop. As our other presenter mentioned, it's already here. There's all sorts of different things that are, computerized to a certain extent that they're giving us some sort of output, and also offer some level of manageability in a lot of those devices. So that really is kind of the emerging frontier of where mobile device management is going. Just a quick word again about the life cycle. The life cycle has, always played out to be the exact same thing in the sense that you take a new device out of the box, you need to enroll it in the system. You need to then provision it with all the right applications and settings. You need to, important aspect of settings is security, and maybe I need to enforce that all the data on the device has to be encrypted. Maybe I want to limit the addressability of this device, ensure that, it just can't go anywhere. It's going to go only to certain subnets, for example. General device management, application management, we're talking about, here's an app, right? So the email app is a good example. It's already installed on the device, fantastic. But guess what? If you just present that device out of the box to a user and say, here, access your corporate email, he's gonna like, what do you want me to do? I don't, like this email app isn't configured yet, right? So we have to configure the application. That's a very important aspect of an MDM solution. Content management is the idea, again, of pushing content out there. And, it's just, we're talking about an enterprise here. Telling the user that they're going to be using a device to increase their productivity assumes that they actually have what they need on the device when they need it. Now, if you don't provide a solution, they'll provide their own solution. They'll take your company data and drop it into a Dropbox and say, hey, it's awesome, I got it on my mobile phone. But if you want to provide a manageable solution, you need to rely on something like an MDM solution to provide that conduit for dispersing the data to the devices. And lastly, device retirement, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but it's actually pretty important, right? Because you want to make sure that you have visibility to these assets if they're corporately owned, and exactly where they are kind of at the end of their life, how are they being properly handled, where did they kind of get terminated. If we're talking about BYOD or any sort of personally enabled variant, it's also very important to understand, was that device properly cleaned of its corporate data before it being released from, IT's visibility. Now, in terms of the categories of mobile device management, so in terms of level of sophistication, this is not necessarily like a chronological thing, but this is where we kind of phrase it in terms of sophistication. BYOD is kind of like the simplest and dumbest option, right? It's usually, okay, here's your device, bring it into the office, assuming that it's a manageable type device. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to do some email. Maybe there's some other sort of apps installed on the device, but it's generally kept pretty simple in terms of the requirements. When you get into corporate liable, that's where the use of a mobile device management solution gets more sophisticated, because you want to really get into the enforcement of settings of the device, you want to get into the enforcement of policies, and you want to be harvesting a lot more data about these devices. And then finally, enterprise mobility is really a full adoption of the business value of these mobile devices. So it's not just an email device, it's not just about a source of content. You are really driving your whole business workflow in a mobile first sort of framework, right? Where it's like the worker's only device is his phone or tablet, like that's it. And so that thing really has to be working, otherwise we're not getting our parcel delivered, or we're not gonna, have this service call, completed. So in terms of the key areas of functionality in mobile device management, the first one, manage. We're dealing with, again, enrollment. Application catalog is, basically saying here are the apps that are available. So when we talk about app management, again, we can kind of say we can force it down to the users, or we can let them to kind of shop for their own. A lot of configuration, provisioning. When we talk about support, support is actually a very kind of underrated area of mobile device management. Everybody thinks typically of install settings and install applications, but after that's done, the real task of IT that they want to try to free themselves is that ongoing support, or try to make that as efficient as possible. So when that user has a problem with that device, how can I really quickly solve the problem? And by having a tool set that enables you to do remote diagnostics or remotely access the device, understand exactly what the user sees on their screen, can be a massive, massive time saver for the IT. Secure, obviously, we hear of the threat of data loss, right? These are too easy to lose, right? That they get displaced all the time. So we want to make sure that there's certain policies that can control the lifetime of that data. So, if the device is out of contact for X amount of time, just, take a preemptive measure to just nuke it. Or, just again, have it encrypted out of the box de facto. We want to, be able to configure a password or, force the user. You must have a password on your device. This is not, a choice. It's a necessity to have a password enforced. The other things that we can kind of do are just, locking the device, in terms of, I think I've lost it, I don't want to kill it just yet, but let me just remotely lock the device, give me a couple hours to try to find it. If I can't find it, then let's, nuke the data. Monitor is, there's a whole bunch of different categories of monitoring, but the general idea is, I want to gather intelligence, right? And I want to ideally be alerted to a certain extent of when something's going on, right? So you want to try to make it, event driven, but just generally we could be harvesting information about, usage patterns. How often are my users using that application that I just spent, $50,000 on? Are they really making use of it as much as I thought they would? Or, where are my security guards? Are they actually on the site, or did they just take a lunch break at home, right? So there's all sorts of things you can monitor. The last one's actually more about tracking, too. If you're talking about live tracking of a device in terms of GPS or some sort of tracking technology. But we also want to track information about, what software is on the device. We want to harvest information to know that we're in accordance with policies, maybe about how many software licenses we have, or we want to be able to locate a device that's being lost or stolen. There's been so many times where our solution's been used to locate missing devices, and the authorities will then be kind of tipped off that, hey, there's a stolen device at this location. They show up in that location and they find a stash of other goods that have been lost and stolen. So it's a pretty useful ways that the solution gets operated on. Okay, operating systems. These are the major operating systems that you see out there. Apple, Android. I put here Windows Modern and then more of the Windows Legacy. It's amazing, we're in 2015 here, the end of 2015. And in the ruggedized world, they are still cranking out, off the factory line, lots and lots of Windows mobile devices. Today Linux, but when we talk about that IoT realm, that's where Linux is definitely coming into the picture. So a little bit of a historical kind of look at mobile device management. So I kind of put here circa 2002 to 2009. We have two main strategies that are playing out. Microsoft's Windows strategy and the BlackBerry OS strategy. So Microsoft comes out with a couple different solutions. Number one, they see the Windows mobile device being managed through the Exchange server. So they say, okay, here, when you use your email application that's embedded in your Windows mobile device, and it connects to an Exchange server, the IT admin will be able to control Exchange policies and have them enforced by the client, the email client on the device. So they could say you must, for example, have a password on this device. So that was an early foray of Microsoft trying to offer mobile device management, but the feature set was like this big. Another solution Microsoft tried is saying that System Center or SMS, and then later System Center MDM was a tool set for managing mobile devices. And both of them were just extremely limited and really not full-fledged solutions. So that gave rise to the opportunity for third-party companies, such as ours and others, to offer solutions, right? So this was a good market. There was a need, and there was, no kind of de facto Microsoft solution that was going to really meet the need. So third-party companies came in and established a market. Now, the comparison point was BlackBerry. Now, BlackBerry did everything, right? They had the hardware, they provided the mobile operating system, and through the BlackBerry Enterprise Server, they provided a very sophisticated system for centralized device management. So they had all bases covered. For an IT administrator, when you had the BlackBerry era, life was pretty good. You had very good control. So these were two very kind of different spaces. Microsoft really wanted the mobile, Windows Mobile to kind of compete against BlackBerry, but that never, came to fruition. Then things really changed. In 2000 and, I guess before that, Apple launched. Okay, a couple of years before this, Apple launched with the iPhone, right? And it made a lot of splash, and all of a sudden you had the whole BYOD era starting where users were showing up to the IT admin and saying, I want to get my corporate email on my iPhone. And he's like, no way. And then after a while, he's like, you need to put it on because I'm the CEO and I'm not going to accept no way. So it's like, okay, let me figure out how. And up until iOS 4, there was really no good way to manage an iOS device. Like, it was just, the Wild West. It's like, they've got corporate data on my iPhone and there's nothing you can do about it. In iOS 4, Apple woke up to the need of the enterprise, and they said, okay, we really want to get these devices in the enterprise. We recognize that there has to be a management solution. So what they did is they embedded into the operating system a daemon, and that is the little mobile device management agent that would be leveraged by a server implemented by a third party. So that was really interesting because, sorry, I'm just going to take a step back here. I forgot to really pick out on one point here. Client server. So solutions developed by these third parties all relied on, we're going to install a little app on the device, and that little app is going to talk to our server, right? So each company would set up their own instance of this, right? Now, when you talk about installing the app on 100 devices, no biggie, right? But when you're deploying thousands of devices, it's kind of a pain in the butt to have to go around and to start off management by installing an application manually. BlackBerry didn't have that problem because they provided the OS, their agent was already embedded. So Apple comes along in iOS 4 and says, okay, here's the way we're going to do it. We're going to embed this agent, but we don't want to build the server side. You guys out there, MDMs of the world, you're going to build the server side. Here's the specification that you need to program to. Now, what was interesting is Apple started off really restricted. So they only released this information to a few select MDMs, which was really anti-competitive. Today it's opened up more, but Apple's still very controlling about who exactly gets access to these APIs. And they basically, over the different releases of iOS, have enhanced this API set. So it started off pretty narrow, but with every single iOS release, it gets more and more extensive. It is really, today a very comprehensive coverage of what you need to do to manage an iOS device, with caveats that iOS still very much is a very consumer-first operating system, which is not enterprise-first, right? So if you guys are still working with iOS devices in IT, yes, the API set has enhanced tremendously, but is it as good as you'd want it to be? It still leaves us wanting. Okay, so then came Android, quick on the heels of iOS. So now in December 2010, you have the Gingerbread operating system. I started here with Gingerbread because before Gingerbread, you really didn't see much of Android trying to penetrate into the enterprise. But with Gingerbread, it started to become a bit of a serious player. But there was a big problem. There was no Android strategy for MDM. Google didn't provide one, the open source community didn't provide one. It's like, just use the device as a consumer device. Nobody thought, hey, can we manage this thing? So that opened the door for third-party solutions. Again, hey, okay, good, market opportunity. there's a big problem. There was no public APIs available for managing the device. So public APIs, I'm referring to documented, supported APIs for doing key things like setting a policy on, what the password has to be, or configuring the fact that, encryption needs to be enabled all the time and the user shouldn't have the option of disabling it. Or I want to silently install an application on the device without user interaction. There was just no means of doing these simple core MDM tasks. So, enter the OEM. So I wrote the line here, if Google isn't going to build it, the OEM will. And that's exactly what happened. Samsung I highlight on this slide because they really were the first, and even today they are many, many miles ahead of any other OEM with Android. They basically said, okay, we need to sell these devices into the enterprise, we need to provide the MDM stack that Google is not. They started off pretty small. Today it's gigantic, their stack of APIs. And they've gone to great lengths to make it also a competitor against BlackBerry. Obviously BlackBerry did more than just the basics. They went to the extent of all the government certifications and all that kind of jazz. Samsung has done that. And again, they relied on third-party MDMs, right? They said, we're going to build a stack of APIs on the device. You guys will leverage them. And so companies such as ours have, and other Android manufacturers have followed in Samsung's wake, but to a much lesser extent. So they have implemented APIs, not quite as sophisticated, right? And we've all heard of Android fragmentation. This is just a fragmentation of how to manage Android devices, and definitely has held back their adoption into enterprise in certain areas, right? What we finally saw recently is that Google finally got serious about the enterprise. So, after many years of wondering when, it finally happened in the spring of, or February of last year. Google formally released Android for Work. Now, what that basically was is that starting with the Lollipop operating system, they built in an MDM, capability right into the operating system. Again, similar notion that we are relying on third-party MDMs to provide the rest of the solution. We're just implementing into the operating system the framework and the API exposure. Now, what's interesting about what Google did is that they kind of created something that was a bit of a hybrid. So it did require you to have an application running on the device. So whereas Apple said there's no app of the MDM provider running on the device, we are the MDM app on the device. Android, through the Google for Work, said, okay, provide an app, here are APIs that you're going to interact with from being resident on the device. And your app obviously connects to your server, and that's your single pane of glass for doing all the configuration. But in addition, Google really is trying to push the Google Play Store. And so all the app management actually is done through the server side. Our server side, or the MDMs, has to connect up to the Google Play API framework. And through Google Play, it then connects down to the Google Play client on the device to manage the device. So you have this kind of two main interfaces that are coming together to manage the Android device. Obviously, Google provided this with the intention of addressing the fragmentation. This is available to all Android OEMs. It started with Lollipop, but even in Lollipop, the adoption was not as high because it wasn't mandatory. As of Android M, which is coming out soon, it will be mandatory. So every single Android device issued that is Google certified, not necessarily just open source, will have the Android for Work capability built in. So with regards to Windows, when we talk about, again, I'm not really thinking about legacy desktops like Windows XP and all that kind of stuff. In terms of the mobile realm, we kind of went from the Windows Mobile solution. Then there was the great void of a solution for Microsoft, and then they started to come out with Windows Phone 8, and they implemented some MDM capabilities in Windows Phone 8, quite limited. And what was interesting about their solution was that they copied the same strategy that Apple did, in the sense that they said there is no need for a third-party mobile device management app on the device. We will provide that built-in application, and you will then just interact with the server side, or sorry, you will create the server side in accordance to the specification that we will, design for the interface, and that's how you will manage this device. So it first came out in Windows Phone 8, and then it was increased or improved in Windows Phone 8.1, and then recently in Windows 10, it was made unified. So the same API set that you would manage a Windows Phone, you would also manage a Windows desktop. And an interesting naming change, Microsoft recently renamed phone to mobile. So now the thing that used to call mobile that wasn't mobile is mobile, and the other one's a phone. It's really confusing. But whether you're dealing with what they call a desktop form factor or a phone form factor, it's the same sort of API set now that we get to use to manage the device. The feature set is, it's evolving, just like, kind of it took Apple a few years to kind of really broaden it out. Microsoft is kind of playing a little bit of catch up here, but, give a few revs. I'm sure that they'll be pretty close to what you can do with an iOS device in terms of managing it. Now, I just want to take a closer look at some of the MDM capabilities. Initial device provisioning. This is, again, a pretty big headache. Now, how do I take a device from out of the box, and I want to get it up and running as quickly as possible? So, very common one is the brute force is manual enrollment. Take the device, click, 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 and spend a few days. Barcode scanning is a really, pretty efficient way. So you just grab your device, scan a barcode. That barcode's got embedded settings, but it does require you to have an app already on the device that knows to read that barcode and do something with it. So if you have already your MDM app on the device, you're good. If not, you first have to add the app manually and then do barcode scanning. There's auto discovery solutions in many solutions. Where it might just kind of, automatically connect to a default Wi-Fi network, automatically look for a fixed address or some sort of, broadcast chirp. And a more recent one is NFC bump, which is pretty cool. I can take one device and I can just tap another device and it just provisions it. It requires that device that's targeted to be in a default state. So it's just ready to be kind of provisioned, and you literally just tap it and boom. It gets all the settings it needs to know where and how to connect to the mobile device management server, and then it gets pumped with all the settings and data and apps. Device configuration, pretty standard, just kind of, giving the rundown. What do we talk about? Email, Wi-Fi, certificates, VPN, power settings, security, managing OS updates. Managing OS updates is a really big one because, a lot of times the OS update is disruptive and you want to schedule it. You don't want it to just happen at random times. Application deployment. So, historically we dealt with just the enterprise controlling all the apps, developing the apps or kind of sourcing them themselves. But today we have kind of a dual thing where there's certain apps that the enterprise will want to push. There's certain apps that the enterprise will allow users to pull and say, oh, I want this particular app. And when you're talking about that selection, there's again a difference between what has the enterprise developed or purchased just for their company to use versus just go out to Google Play or go out to iTunes App Store and kind of select whatever you want. There's all sorts of programs in there for purchasing and volume licensing. All those things are big, they're complicated, and they need a device management solution to handle all those things. Secure content library is just again one of those features again where it's like you want to control the content. A good example of a use case is an airline, where today what they're doing is they're replacing that big briefcase that a pilot would have to carry Well, you know what's in that briefcase? It's airplane manuals. Like FAA rules are you have to have all your manuals beside you when you're flying an airplane, right? Because if anything goes wrong, you got to be able to flip through the manual and figure out how to deal with the situation. Well, they're replacing that now with tablets, like iPads or other tablets. But the company needs to know that all the right versions of those manuals are on those devices, right? Dropbox isn't going to provide you that sort of level of assurance. So that's why you need a managed solution for that. Geofencing is another, when we talk about that kind of monitoring and tracking, really important in terms of being able to manage the device based on where it is. When it enters a proximity, then do this. Or if it exits a proximity, then do that. So there's a kind of a lot of control that you can gain by having awareness of where that device is. Web filtering, we're talking about just controlling access to where that person is browsing. I want to make sure as a company policy that my users using these devices have access to the internet but are not allowed to visit explicit websites. So you can deal with certain level of filtering. There's a lockdown ability that's common in these solutions, which basically is targeted more at, think of your kind of line of business device. So this is not just a personally enabled device, it's I'm a courier. I've got 3 apps on this device that I should access, and that's it. I should not be messing around with anything else with this device. So you can just lock down the entire interface, give them access to those 3 apps, and that's it. And then self-service portal is, just kind of idea, IT ridding themselves of some headaches and let the user help themselves. And the last one I'm going to touch upon is just, second last, is real-time support. Again, in mobile device management, very often kind of neglected is the importance of that ongoing support and having that tool set to kind of help the user out. We find so many times the end user is new to the device, new to the application, and they just need a hand. And so having the tool set instead of just being blind over the phone is very, very powerful to bringing kind of value to the IT department. And the last aspect of these solutions is APIs. So as mobile device management becomes more and more important, because mobile devices are becoming central to the business operation, the interaction and the integration of the mobile device management solution with other back-end solutions is becoming very key. So you're seeing a lot of rise of the ability to tie in the MDM system into other systems in the enterprise. Last slide here, just a little shout out to the Internet of Things. There's all sorts of other things that are needing management, and some of those things already are smart enough today to be managed, but many more are coming online. The interaction of all these things together is where it gets really interesting, right? And having a system that knows that this is your phone and that is a door sensor, and if you bring your phone to that door sensor, something's going to happen, and being able to manage those in collaboration with each other is really kind of the next frontier, where it gets just kind of an exciting new world to sort of imagine. So that was my overview of mobile device management.